All right, everybody, we are giving it a second while we get loaded up. It looks like it's just X at the moment. And there we go. It looks like we are now live on the Cashflow Chronicles YouTube channel. Been a minute, and I'm excited to be back with you guys. And Chris just rage quit already. He was upset with how I introduced the beginning of the podcast.
I had to stream, I had to log in to stream it to Twitter. So
you're good. But yes, hopefully you guys are doing well. It's been a minute since we were able to chat with you. Let's see. The last time I streamed with Mr. Patel, I think was March 11th. So it's almost been a month. I know that you were out. I was out. Been a wild month over that time period. Chris and I have some differing opinions as to what's going on in the markets or the likeness of it. So it'll be an interesting conversation. But overall, I think we're both excited about the future potential with respect to the portfolio. We had a good chat earlier about some of our favorite plays. But Mr. Patel, anything crazy before we hit the intro?
No, man. Just we'll go right into it, man. We'll go right into it. So
all right, let's just hit it.
Greed is good.
The stock is going to go up, down, sideways, or in fucking circles. It's all a fugazi.
Sell it all.
Greed is good. Huge upside potential, upwards of $60,000.
All right. Man, it is always good. It's always good to be able to chat with you. You always provide a very good perspective on what's going on, but at the same time, you're a lot more eloquent of a speaker than I am. So anyway, it's always good to hear.
I don't know if that's 100% true, man.
No. You know what you're doing.
Okay, so today was a very, very green day. And I think the reason why today was a very green day was because there was a certain level of uncertainty that was kind of lifted, right? I think we were told that Liberation Day was going to be like this big event that was supposed to, radically change the trajectory of the country, which theoretically it might have actually done it. But I think what investors were looking at, it was a little too much, right? So I think everyone expected about 10% tariffs, something to just equalize things. And the mention of reciprocal tariffs meant that we were going to be doing like countries that have 3, 4, 5, maybe 7% tariffs. We would do, something similar. When we saw 30, 40, 50% tariffs, that was just insane. So I think the market reacted very poorly to that news. I think a couple of days, the Trump administration kind of said, everything will be all right. Like the market will digest it. And it turned out that that wasn't the case. For the last couple of days, it was really bad. And then last night, the bond market started flashing red. So credit spread started to widen, and the plumbing that is the modern economy was starting to stall. Usually when that happens, you end up getting a recession, right? So the way that it typically happens is if you go into the zone, let me just bring it up on my Twitter real quick. This way we can see.
Yeah. The thing that interests me that I'm still trying to figure out is the whole bond market thing overnight over the past. So everything was understandable, right? It looked like it was strictly for me looking at what's going on, and feel free to bring up what you're bringing up and just while you're doing that. The thing that I was understanding was obviously the market was reacting with respect to the potential trade war that's going on. Obviously, we're in one now with China, as we've seen the legitimate news of war being noted. And guys, just let me know, this presentation mode on StreamYard keeps changing. So if you don't see it, let me know. But yeah, this yield thing really, really confused me.
Okay, so let's dial it back, and I'll explain to everyone. There's certain types of bonds that are out there, right? There's two main types if you think about it. There's high yield, right? And then there's investment grade. High yield typically means that you're not in the greatest of like risk. I mean, you're not imminently gonna default unless you're like triple C's and D's. But the way that the bond market works is that the riskier you are, the higher premium that's demanded, right? So if you're a business right now and you don't have like a AAA credit rating or investment grade rating, which means that you're a very strong company with very strong earnings, you're going to have to borrow at a certain rate. Okay. And that rate is then weighed against a risk-free rate, which is what you get with the Federal Reserve, right? So if you go to the Fed, they give you money, that is the rate of return that is super safe. So when you weigh that against high yield, that is what this chart basically outlines, and it's options adjusted. So what this means is that when there's market uncertainty, what ends up happening is the yields widen. So what happens is the yield on something super safe and the thing that is not as safe, it grows farther and farther. So if you look at companies right now that are not investment grade, they're still good companies. It's just they're not investment grade. They have challenges when it comes to getting liquidity, right? So let's say right now you got a 5-year bond that you got during COVID, it's coming due. Okay. You need to refinance it. Now you got it when you got it at 5%. Now, if the spread has widened so much, so let's say 5, what ends up happening now, it's going to cost you 10% as opposed to 5%, right? So what you would do is you would take the federal funds rate that we have, which was super low, and then you would add points on top of it to basically get an idea of how much the cost to borrow is. So if you have a profit margin of, let's say, 12%, right? And you were paying out of that 12%, you're paying, let's say, 5% to interest charges, and then you were capturing a 7% net income, net income margin, you were good. But if now all of a sudden you had to pay 10%, your profit margin drops to 2%, right? And so what happens is in times of uncertainty, the high yield market becomes that spread becomes wide because those companies are the least likely to be to survive a downturn, right? So if you think about a company like Procter and Gamble, they're fine. They're a multinational company. They got investment grade. I think they have investment grade. They have investment grade debt. So even if, let's say, a recession comes, they're going to survive. It's not a problem. But if you're a small cap company with, let's say, less than $100 million of revenue, and now all of a sudden your capital costs just shoot up, you got a problem. Like right now, Venture Global is not investment grade because they're still in developing mode. They're still developing all these facilities to basically cash flow so that in the future they can get to investment grade. So a lot of small cap companies, they graduate and become medium cap, and then medium caps graduate and become large cap. So the problem is when the market, or when you go into a recession, those small cap and medium cap businesses, they take huge hits. And one of the reasons why they take a massive hit is because the cost of capital jumps up. So if you look at something like COVID, where uncertainty just absolutely went crazy, look at that giant spike, what happened during that recession, right? So when that thing jumped, all of a sudden it became harder for those companies to borrow. Luckily, the Fed came in and just basically flushed the entire market with liquidity. So everyone kind of just chilled out, and the spreads came back down again. We had a similar thing happen during the regional bank crisis, and also during the SPAC issues. Remember when the SPACs all started to implode towards the end of 2021? Yep. So you can see that giant rise in credit spreads, how they almost went all the way to 6%, right? And then during the SPAC crisis, it started to get elevated and stayed in the 5s. Since then, the economy's been doing good. Everyone's been doing good. So the credit spreads have come down. And so if you look at this chart, if you're under 4%, that gap is under 4% between investment grade and what it is and high yield, you're fine. Like, let's say right now the Fed funds rate is 4%. That means that you can borrow at like 7. But all of a sudden, if the economy goes bad and now you have to borrow at 7-8% over what the Fed funds rate is, if the Fed funds rate is 4, you have to pay 8% or whatever, you're going to end up paying a crap ton more in interest charges. And especially if you have a business that's very capital intensive, where you have thin margins, it's a pretty big challenge. So that's why you have to be very careful with credit spreads. Usually when credit spreads widen, it usually is an early indicator that the economy is not doing so good. The challenge is it's the rate at which they increase. Because if businesses have a way in a period of time, they can adjust, right? Mm-hmm. They, instead of buying back shares, deploy more towards, debt reduction. But all of a sudden, if the price that you're paying jumps up, like 5, like like 500, 600 basis points, and you got a major problem, and you don't,
Yeah.
you
You have to manage it.
only,
Yeah.
yeah, and the only way to fix it is usually by cutting back on things that could end up causing more of a recessionary impact, like things like cutting back on marketing, right? Marketing spend is usually the first thing. Then comes personnel. Then comes capital spending on new projects and growth. So if you had a business that was doing really well, and all of a sudden, you lose access to capital, you got to start making cuts somewhere to survive.
Yeah.
And usually that ends up being that people lose jobs. And I think that's the part that people kind of missed a little bit. And people think like, oh, the stock market is the reason why Donald Trump switched it up. And I'm like, no. It wasn't the stock market. It was it was the credit market. It's the credit market starting to flash warning signs saying, look, you better get this under control. I mean, this is not updated. This is from 4/4. So we'll see one that once I see the credit. Let me look at it right now. Let's see where it is.
Yeah, it might be a few days old. But I want to give people, I think a lot of people know what's been going on, but I want to reiterate basically. So basically, April 2nd kind of came around, right? Because it's been a month since we chat. April 2nd came around. That was obviously supposed to be the first part of where we were supposed to kind of release tariffs. He kind of released this graphic that showed the various different, currency adjusted tariffs that we get charged globally. And then obviously that was supposed to go into effect midnight, literally, I guess, 23 hours ago, 21 hours ago. And with that, obviously, the markets have obviously not received that well, assuming that there's going to be a complete shift in economic environment in the United States. People are going to isolate the United States. Canada, people are stopping buying any sort of thing American. Everyone anticipates that that's not just going to be specifically Canadian. That's going to be Mexico's going to do the same. China, Japan, everyone just is going to isolate the United States and no longer wants to trade with the United States because we're being dickheads, is what I've been told publicly by many people. And I'm curious, Chris. I think we can both agree that the United States is not in good footing. We're $36 trillion in debt. And you're about to bring up something specifically with this chart that you show here. But before I give it back to you, we're obviously in an increasing rate environment over the past 24 months. We have to refinance a large chunk of that $8 to $9 trillion of debt this year. With that, we've already surpassed $1 trillion worth of interest rate payments. So to me, something has to be done, right? And I think you're in agreement, and correct me if I'm wrong, something has to be done to be able to get us in a better position, because obviously we just continue to sit on our laurels with respect to interest rates continuing to climb, nothing being done about the deficit, etc. We're not going to have an America to complain about. However, there's just, I think, a lot of changes happen with DOGE being enacted. Obviously, people can have their political stance, whether they like Elon, they don't like Elon, they're with DOGE or without DOGE. But I think they're finding good opportunities for corruption in the United States government. They're able to remove some of that, and they've found tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars at this point. Waste, fraud, abuse within the government spending. Coupling that with, obviously, the tariff piece, trying to get more money through the door. And I want to remind everybody, I thought that this was a very fun point. I'm not an expert in this at any point or with respect to tariffs or anything like that, unlike all the other people on X who are tariff experts. But I did some research with respect to the 2018 tariffs. I think it's very interesting. Many different political parties have brought up tariffs in the past to be able to increase government revenue. And as we know, Trump 1.0 also did select tariffs as well, specified, not necessarily as blanketed as we saw in 2.0. But I want to give everyone some context here. If tariffs were so bad, and everyone raised a stink in Trump 1.0 as well about tariffs, and a comparable, now that we're kind of on the other side of this thing a little bit, we're not out of the woods yet, but a little bit in Trump 2.0, I feel it was very comparable to Trump 1.0, where he kind of hit everybody in the face with the book of, we're going to increase your tariffs X, Y, Z. We need to get back to even, etc. And he fell back on, it to basically ease everything off and focus specifically on China. That was very comparable to Trump 1.0. But I want to get people to kind of understand, I think that what we're doing, me personally, is warranted. I'm curious to hear Chris's response to this, and I want to give him back to this chart. But I think the problem that I have a little bit of unease with, but at the same time I can understand and trust that the government and the economics folks that are in power know a lot more than I do, is something needed to be done with DOGE, helping and coupling with that to be able to mitigate our deficit and get us to a place where we are no longer spending at a massive, 500 billion to $1 trillion a year, if not more, deficit. But I think what people have the problem with is the speed at which it's been done, and maybe the what's the word I'm looking for, aggressiveness of it. And I think it would have been more well received. I still think it would have still been accused of being too hysteric and too aggressive by the mainstream media, regardless of the speed and the pace of it. But I think the speed at which it was done over the past 2 to 3 months is really what has angered people, and had this divisiveness between folks thinking that Trump knows what he's doing, Trump doesn't know what he's doing, etc. So I wanted to give that context, and as well as my opinion, because I've given it on X. You and I haven't talked publicly against each other, but I have people heard you calling you Kamala Patel and things of the other. And so I'm kind of curious with respect to where I stand, coupled with that context, if there's anything that I'm missing.
Well, the thing is, like Stanley Druckenmiller said, tariffs are okay, especially if you're trying to get an outcome out of like the countries on the other side, right? Where you kind of want them to invest a little bit more on our side and basically give a leg up to our workers who've been diminished by, years of policy. But the challenge is you can't do this crazy, let's walk to the edge together, right? And then expect everyone to be okay with it. It's one thing to go to 10%. And you can see that when initially the announcement came out during Liberation Day, that thing, 10% was acceptable. The market was actually rallying off of that. And then instead, what happened? They saw 30, 40, 50% on even people who we have a trade surplus with. They ended up getting hit by this thing too. So that just brought a lot of market uncertainty. And regarding what you're saying right now, look, this is the major problem that we're running into as a country. We have a lot of debt on the balance sheet, but we also have a lot of GDP. Like, as long as our GDP is growing, the debt is not as big of a problem, especially if, you are growing, right? So as an example, one of the highest people like that I know that has a ton of debt is Matt. Matt has a ton of debt. Okay. But Matt also has a lot of real estate that's cash flowing, right? So as long as your GDP is growing, debt is not a problem. The problem becomes when your debt becomes so big and the interest rates start to go up, that now you're paying more towards debt than paying towards critical things that you actually need to happen, like the military, like healthcare for senior citizens, and school and education. That's the challenge that you run into. So right now you can see we were spending prior to the rise in interest rates, we're spending about 1.3, sometimes to 2% on our total debt right now to GDP.
So like 300 billion-ish a year for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. And then all of a sudden, we started spending a whole lot of money, and our GDP absolutely exploded. So if you look at our GDP right now, GDP went up significantly for the US. Look at this in a 10-year context. Look at that. We went from 18 trillion in 2014 to like almost 30 billion. Okay. So we had huge GDP growth, but at the same time, we also have now a ton of interest rate charges. So if you look at the interest expense,
such a good website.
Let me look at hold on. Federal outlays.
I will say I don't agree with a lot of what the government does in terms of like websites and stuff like that, but this website is actually really good.
Yeah. Look at what happened to our interest charges. We were paying in 2021 350 billion in interest. Now, like as of last quarter, we paid $881 billion in interest charges. So this is unsustainable To go from 300 to 800, you're literally paying $500 billion more. And the projected amount that we're going to do this year, because this is actually old data, this is from 2021, the third quarter, we're going to pay close to $1 trillion plus. So we're going to be spending more on interest than we are on even the biggest line items that we have in our budget. So in order to control this, we've got to make sure that, you know, we're taking all the right steps. One of the steps that you definitely need to take is that you need to keep the economy growing. The last thing you want to do is have your GDP start to come down. When your GDP starts to come down, you collect less in taxes. And when you collect less in taxes, you're not able to afford to pay all of this money back, and especially this interest. On top of this, you need to get interest rates down to a more manageable level again. Right now, interest rates, because of the Fed basically raising interest rates, has gone absolutely insane. Right. So if you look at this website from the Senate, right, this is our GDP right here. And this is actually up-to-date information. What you can see here is that a lot of the debt that we issued in the last 5 years, and this is where you really got to blame Janet Yellen, because she really messed up. During 2020 and 2021, we should have been terming out our debt as much as possible. Now, what does that mean? That means that at the time, our interest rate on our bonds, that are 20 and 30 years out, they were 2%. Right now, if you go into the market to issue new debt, you're going to pay almost 4.25% to 4.5%. And last night, the interest rates jumped all the way to almost 5% on the 30
over 5%. Yep.
So that is scary, because if we have to pay 5% on $36 trillion,
each percentage point's $360 billion.
Right. So that's why you needed to get things down. So you can see here T-bills. This is how much interest you're paying on one year out debt. So you're paying right now 4.35%. So you can see here it's spiked up all the way to almost 5 and something when the Fed raised rates. And as the Fed is cutting, things are starting to kind of come down again, which is good. Now, on the other hand, we're terming out some of that debt with notes. So you can see here, the average rate that we were paying on our 10-year note was below 2% in August. And now we're paying almost 3%, right? If Janet Yellen had done what she was supposed to do right here in August 2021, instead of issuing a lot more bills, like that we issued right here, the 1 year thing, she should have been issuing a lot more 30-year and 10-year notes. And what would have happened is we would have been paying 2% and 3%, but our GDP would have been growing 5%, which means that it's almost like what you're doing. You're borrowing from the bank at, let's say, when you bought your house, the last one a few years ago, 4% or 3%, but the cash flow that you're getting is 7-8%. And over time, you can raise rents just like the country can raise GDP, but that interest that you have to pay stays the same, right? On that debt that you issued. So what ends up happening is any of that money now becomes a big surplus to you because you're outgrowing your debt. So debt isn't a problem as long as you can manage it properly. And I think that's where the challenge is, because if you have a growth trajectory and you're able to grow, you can manage any sort of debt. But if you start to shrink your GDP and the debt interest charges go up, that's the worst case scenario. So that is what was happening yesterday. Interest rates were starting to climb up because people were like, oh my God, the economy is going to slow down. So a lot of people were dumping bonds. There was some news. I don't know if it's 100% true, but there was a couple of banks that got caught in Japan on the other side of this thing, and they had to liquidate, but literally rates were spiking. So today,
I thought it was Japan, because Japan, I don't know if it's the government or just the whole entity of Japan, has over close to $1 trillion worth of the debt of the United States. So, and in China used to have more. They used to have about $1 trillion and a half. They've actually delevered a good bit. Now they only have 800 billion. But that was my thought process, was is this also Japan? Because you can't have one country offloading $1 trillion worth of debt overnight, right? But what they can do is delever themselves a little bit to get more liquidity. And I think that's kind of what it was.
Let me pull up a macro chart that I have that shows what kind of debt that we have. Foreign debt holders.
But I want to get into this. So you were pull that up. So don't avoid
Yeah.
that. You were very much in the space where you weren't entirely certain whether or not we would have an event like this today. What were you thinking going into today? Were you thinking that we might be a couple weeks out? Were you thinking we were just going to raise reciprocal tariffs to China up to like 400%, and it's just going to continue to tank the market? I mean, before today, what were your thoughts?
Before today, I thought that the Trump administration was trying to put a lot of uncertainty into the markets to try to get more people to buy bonds, but it kind of backfired on them a little bit because less people were confident. Because when they announced all these tariffs, people started to say, wait a second, inflation is going to be high next year with all this tariff. Like if consumers have to pay more, that means that interest rates are going to go up, because if inflation goes up, the Fed is going to have to raise rates, in which case now you're defeating the original goal. And the thing is, if you look in the background, what was actually happening, you've got the Peter Navarros of the world, which are complete dickwads. Okay. When I see Peter Navarro's face, dude, it's like I want to punch him in the face so bad, because he's like one of these ideologues that has been pushing for massive amounts of tariffs, but he doesn't understand the internal plumbing of how things you can actually wreck your entire economy by trying to do things too fast and the level that he wants. He doesn't care. He's one of those types of people that it's very ideological in his way of thinking, but what ends up happening is it causes a tremendous amount of pain if you do it his way. Now, if you look at the colorful story behind Peter Navarro, he ran unsuccessfully like 5 times in San Diego for like, I think some office. He didn't get that. He's one of the only economists that believes that tariffs are a good thing. Like it's a massively good thing. Like, so he supports it. And what's funny is he's a big China hawk. So he's very anti-China. And Jared Kushner is the one that found him and brought him into Trump administration. So it wasn't so that Peter Navarro was this high intellectual. It's just Jared Kushner kind of was like researching the topic and then found this guy, and they brought him in and they just said, okay, you could be a trade advisor. And the funny thing is, there's not a lot of economists who support this theory. So it's hard to find people that are going to be like, yeah, I think tariffs are a great idea. So what Trump did was align people in his administration to be pro-tariff, right? Now, Scott Bessent, thank God for Scott Bessent, because he is a markets guy. He understands that you can do tariffs, but it has to be in a strategic way, and you do it in a way where you're trying to accomplish a goal, right? You're not trying to turn this into like a giant tax on the middle and lower income people. Because look, honestly, tariffs that is a tax on lower income people. Why? Because as a rich person, you're going to sleep on the same pillow as the guy at the baseline of the income spectrum. So if you think about it, who is 20% higher on the pillow gonna impact? Is it gonna impact the rich guy more, or is it gonna impact the guy who's not making as much money, right? So the thing is, if you think about it, yeah, there's all of this tariffs are going to be coming in. There's money that's going to be coming into the treasury, which is great, but it's going to come on the backs of higher prices, which are an invisible tax on everyday people. So if like right now you get a bicycle from China and costs twice as much than it did last year, technically you're not paying a tax, but if you have to pay twice as much, half of that money that you're going to be getting, right? I mean, half the value of that bicycle is going to go back into the treasury in the form of a tax.
Yeah.
So that's the part that I think people kind of don't understand, or sometimes some of the people just don't want to understand that. They're just like, no, I think tariffs are a great thing. This is how manufacturing is going to come back to the United States. And I'm like, well, maybe we want some parts of manufacturing to come back. Like we definitely want shipbuilding to come back to our country, because just strategically, that's very important, right? We want high level semiconductors to come back. Makes total sense. Certain high precision machinery, we definitely need that back in the country. But you don't want to build t-shirts. Like, I don't know anyone that's like, yeah, let me go work into a t-shirt factory and make t-shirts. And not to mention the value that's generated from producing t-shirts it's not worth it to do it. Our people can do better.
It's not even worth it for China anymore.
Yeah,
I don't think people recognize that. A lot of stuff's in Vietnam or Thailand, and a lot of that
Bangladesh,
stuff is Bangladesh.
China basically is like, we're too important to make this stuff. They've outsourced their stuff to Bangladesh because they're like, look, our income, like Chinese, like if you look at the Chinese consumer, they're no longer making like $2,000-3,000. They're making like $15,000-16,000 a year, right? So their incomes have steadily risen to the point where they're like, we're no longer really that low of income. So they've been pushing down to the Bangladesh people who are like, we'll accept 1,000, 2,000. You know,
that's why Singapore is so well placed, because Singapore, while their GDP is very high per capita, they're in between a lot of these countries that actually have the ability to still do things at between $500 and $3,000 per year, right? So, and then they have the ability to kind of manage that from their geolocation because they're kind of in the middle of everything. It's very interesting. I've been looking a lot about it because I'm doing some work in the Eastern Hemisphere at the moment. So, but yeah, very interesting. Okay, so that's helpful. But you agree that something needed to be done. I mean, in terms of tariffs, do you just think that had it been done and executed in a better fashion, you would have been okay with it? Because it seems you're very upset with the president at this moment.
I think the level. I think there's two reasons why I'm upset. I wouldn't say upset at the president. Upset is the wrong word. I'd say critical of the president for a policy move. So my thing is, number one, when it comes to certain allies, we shouldn't be treating them like you're raping us and you're robbing us, like Mexico and Canada. Like, dude, they are not raping you and like taking your business. Like, that's not what they're doing. They definitely have some things that are unfair. I'm not disagreeing with that. Like some of the stuff on their dairy products, absolutely, there's some protectionism there. But we have to, as a bigger country, have to understand that, look, there's a certain voting block that's in that country that has a domestic manufacturing base that they can't completely abandon. You know, like imagine us right now. We said, you know what? We're going to allow every single country to kind of dump all of their goods into us and bankrupt all of our farmers. Would we accept that? Like, no, we wouldn't want that. We want to make sure that our farmers are there because they're strategically important. So the Canadians do similar things. Mexico has, became a little bit, and this is the one thing I agree with Donald Trump, became a hub for China to circumnavigate tariffs, where the Mexicans, the Chinese would just send their stuff to Mexico and the Mexicans would send it across the border. It's like, this is a Mexican product. No, it's not. You just, doing this game. And Vietnam was doing the same thing. So in that regard, it totally makes sense where you want to apply it, but you have to do it in a strategic way where you're not telling American companies that have massive investments in Mexico, sorry, you got to close all that stuff down. All the capital that you spent, that billions of dollars, you need to just write that off and bring everything to America and try to make that same product that has a labor cost that's 5 times, maybe even 10 times cheaper. You have to bring it here and make it over here. And the thing is, a lot of supply chains, it takes time to actually get to that level where you can make things work. Right? You can raise prices slowly. You can, make some adjustments. It's just doing it in such a fashion is something that I disagree with. I also disagree with some of the rhetoric that the Trump uses. Like
I already talked about that on the close. Yeah.
Yeah. Like saying that, like, oh, all these countries are just coming here and kissing my ass. Like, dude, don't do that. Like, you're a world leader, man. Act like it.
I can understand if he says that at dinner, with like 6 people. But it was a legitimate publicized event, and so I'm with you on that. Can I ask a political question? Feel free not to answer it. My thought process through this whole thing is I would much rather see my president with his elbows on the table, even if it might be too aggressive, because I feel like it's actually going to make a point. Then I would just be blunt and say the previous president, which was either leaning back in his chair or not really making many decisions at all. And I guess I'm kind of curious about how you feel about that. Would you rather still kind of be in a position where your president's kind of just leaning back and kind of flying, by the seat of his pants, or would you rather have a president that's kind of elbows on the table and making sure shit gets done?
No, trust me. I would much rather have Trump than Biden when it came to a lot of these things. Right? At least Trump is making an issue of it. Biden just let it happen. I mean, Biden how many millions of people through the border? Trump closed it off and said, look, we're getting all sorts of issues with drugs, with human trafficking coming through the border. So in that regard, you have to be with the president. And that's one of the reasons why I voted for the guy.
Right.
You know, the amount of flack that I get when I go to family, like, because most of my family, they're all liberals, especially my wife's side of the family.
Yeah.
Bro, you know how many times I've sat there and had to basically argue against an entire crowd of people? And I've done it. Even like me and my friends, we go on a cabin trip, they're all uber liberals. They're like, oh, this is, Chris is the Trump supporter. So one of those things that sucks about this is that when Trump acts like this, it lends them fuel to the fire and comes at, and it says, look, your guy is just mentally unstable. He's crazy. Look at what he's doing. He's crashing the economy. Like, how could you not see that he was going to do that? And how do you defend yourself that? How do you say to them, yeah, you know what? No, this is all. And the funny thing is sometimes, the wording is, this is all according to the plan. This is art of the deal. And I'm like, bullshit, dude. This is not art of the deal. Like, anyone that is looking through the lines, you can tell that there was definitely an influence struggle in the background. And the better parts of the influential people, they won. So, Scott Bessent, we all owe a debt of gratitude to Scott Bessent. Okay. Bessent. This guy was able to convince Trump. So he literally flew to Sunday night. He flew to Mar-a-Lago and said, look, President Trump, if we don't get this thing solved, we're going to head into a recession and we're going to be in worse shape, because now we're going to have to be fighting inflation and we're going to have to be fighting a GDP growth slowdown, which makes the problem even worse. And then if millions of people start losing their jobs, that's another major problem, because then you're basically handing the Democrats the midterms. And if the Democrats get control of the House and the Senate in the midterms, now the next 2 years, which you could have actually used to craft good policy, end up going towards just fighting impeachment. So
Okay.
I think this is where we really, thank God we got an adult in the room in Scott Bessent. He was able to talk this down. Elon Musk, thank God, is also there guiding some of Trump's hand and saying, look, Mr. President, look, we agree with you on tariffs, but we want to do it in a way where we're not going to blow up our economy. And I think today, when Trump kind of backed off a little bit and showed some grace on the topic, the market said, oh, thank God, like, there's still an adult in the room. This is not just an ideological war that we're going to be fighting, and the consumer is the one that's going to end up bearing the brunt of it.
I just, I'm of the firm belief that I knew things were never going to end that way with respect to what they showed on April 2nd. So to me, even though it was only lingering for a little bit over a week, it just seemed to me that it was kind of premature for the market and folks to freak out that much. The reason why I think they backed out is because they probably have a backlog of phone calls to still go through with everybody, because obviously you can't negotiate 50 to 75 different countries, different companies as well. I'm sure there's select companies that are trying to reach out regardless of what their country wants to do. So to me, I feel like that was probably the reason why they backed off a sufficient amount, was because first and foremost, a lot of these countries were never going to get raised tariffs in the long term anyway. I think it was just a tactic to say, look, we're not the Biden administration. We're here to make shit happen. And, gone are the last 4 years, or the third Obama term, right? We're actually here to make some shit happen. So to me, I think that was a part of the kind of thought process. There's been a lot of turnover since Trump 1.0. So I think he just wanted to let people know, and I think he was well regarded in his first term. Whether or not people liked him, different story, but well regarded in terms of somebody that actually got shit done. I mean, it was pretty evident, right? I mean, he fucking walked into North Korea, for God's sakes. So, I mean, in terms of being able to build relationships and get on people's side, whether or not it was their good side or not, but at least was able to make relationships happen, I think he was just trying to make sure that the people knew this isn't going to be the last 4 years. To basically get to where they were in terms of the aggressiveness, I honestly blame the market more than I blame Trump, because do I agree with the severity of what showed up? No, but the severity of it was so ridiculous that to me it never made sense in the first place. To the fact that, I don't think Trump and his economists are dumb enough, and I'm sure everyone in the mainstream media probably disagrees with this statement. I don't think Trump and his advisors are dumb enough to think that that was going to be a good idea going forward for the long term. And so I think where they did was they swung the pendulum from Trump 1.0 to now Trump 2.0 to gain access to people, what's the word I'm looking for? Tightening their sphincter, realizing that shit's going to happen, and be like, look, we got to make a fucking deal. Otherwise, who knows what the hell is going to happen, right? Is it going to stop? Let's just take China, for example. It was starting at 50 something percent. Are they going to stop at 40%, 30%, 20%? Now, of course, we're in this whole war with them, but as an example with respect to that. So, it at least gets the conversation going to say, look, we have to meet them halfway or more so. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen. But I think what I want to lean this into, and feel free to rebuttal that because there's a lot of information in there. What I have seen is, with respect to these country discussions, something that you and I have been long on, which is LNG, coming up very, very regularly, whether it's with South Korea, Japan, other nations like India, and I've even seen some European nations being like, look, LNG is what we kind of need to secure. That to me is beneficial, and to give people a lay of the land of the context, and I'll let you kind of take it, and you can either build on it or go with it. We are now exporting probably this year 95 to 100 MTPA. Last year, I think we did about 85 to 90 MTPA. So peaks above that probably on a I guess like a monthly basis, but overall on an average throughout the year, we exported about 88 million tons. This year, we're on track to probably get closer to 100. In the long term, meaning in the next decade, 2035 plus, we will be exporting over 200 MTPA, which the only other country that I believe is on track to even come close to us is probably Qatar. Everybody else, I think, and we might actually get to 250 MTPA now that I'm thinking about it, towards the latter half of the 2030s.
Dude, if you get Alaska, that's going to be a big one.
Alaska is going to be at least 40 MTPA itself. And we know next decade's going to be, the Rio Grande's going to be 40 MTPA, 45 MTPA. Sabine Pass is almost done. They were at 30. They're going to expand it to 50. Corpus Christi's at 20. They're going to expand it to 30 or 25. So those guys are peaked out. Next decade, I think, is really the only place you need to look with respect to what else is in the pipeline. And that's going to be close to, I forget what it is. I think it's like another 100 MTPA or close to 100 MTPA of capacity. And you have next decade, that's going to have 40. Driftwood, I don't know how big Driftwood is, but it's not small. It's like 20, I think, or maybe 30 MTPA. So you have a lot of growth, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And to me, I heard a lot of people talking about, not really thinking about this, people that were tariff experts on X and Facebook. The United States, the only thing that they export are fast food companies, shitty cars. I feel some of the other rhetoric that I heard, right? And so to me, it's just like, no, I mean, you think about it, people always give us crap for importing Canadian oil. Well, we export just about as much as we import from Canada. We export close to 3 to 4 million barrels a day to countries like South Korea and others that don't have the capability to produce the liquid that we have. So we have the capability, and I want to get people to understand this, not only from an LNG perspective, but from a refining perspective. We have the capability to refine West Canadian Select, which is heavier crudes, unlike many other countries. So for us, we're doing Canadians a favor. While we have sweeter, lighter crudes that we can export, that is much easier for other countries to digest into their refineries. So in our opinion, it's cheap, and Western Canadian Select generally trades at a discount of $10 to $15 against WTI. So if you think when we went to $53 literally yesterday on WTI, they were probably trading in the high 30s, low 40s. in terms of being able to. So we're technically buying that from them, giving them a favor, because otherwise they would have to. I don't even know where they would send it to, and who would accept it. So for us, that allows.
I mean, it's a great
relationship. Great relationship. Right?
It's a great deal for us too.
So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah. It's a great deal for us. And that's one of those areas where there's certain things in the trade deficit that's actually a good thing that we have that trade deficit, right? The Canadians sell us cheap oil, we refine it and sell it at a way bigger markup. If they started refining their own stuff and exporting it, that means that they would get the benefit, not us. So this is where we have to just net things out sometimes and just understand that not everything is just based on that trade deficit, because there's a lot of other things too. Like, just because we have a trade deficit with a country when it comes to goods doesn't mean that we don't provide a ton of services. So as an example, when you have Palantir doing deals in Europe, you're not like, oh my God, you're generating a trade surplus, you better buy some of Europeans' shitty software. Like, no, whatever the best software is what people are going to buy. And guess what? America, baby, we got the best software. That's high margin business. People are making it while sitting at home on their computers, and that's the software. And it comes with huge margins, no pollution, right? No destruction to the environment. The margins are so good that our people end up developing a much higher growth rate and GDP, because now it's a lot more scalable. So the thing is, like, people forget that we export a lot of soft stuff that other countries consume. Like right now, India has 1 billion users, but you know what? All these users are on Google searching things. Google's making a killing doing marketing in India, as a search engine. Facebook is out there. No one's like, hey, we should use a browser from India, because then that would be like the trades. No, like, whoever provides the best good for the best price tends to win. And you know what? The US, we've got that. Same thing with cars and technology and stuff. We should be willing to compete. But the one thing Trump is right, it should be fair. Now, when the countries on the other side are subsidizing those industries to the tune of hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, that's a problem. Now, here's the thing. A lot of times what they're doing is they're subsidizing infant industries, like industries that have just basically started. This way, they can have some economic growth for their population. Because the thing is, right now, if you think people are mad at the US, behind closed doors, everyone is pissed off at China. You know why? Because China dumps all of their shit into other countries. And then you know what happens? The other countries lose their entire domestic manufacturing base at all. Do you know one of the countries that has massive tariffs against China? India. Because the Chinese were dumping so much stuff in there. The Indians like, screw this. Like, we're trying to develop economically too. So if you look at some of the policies, like India has a ban on all these Chinese apps that they thought were like spying on them and stuff. So you don't have I don't think you have TikTok in China because it's banned in India. So these are the kinds of things. So every country has some level of protectionism. The thing is, it's a very, very nuanced thing. So you can't just use the trades, and that's the part that I think everyone, including every economist, was like jarred by. The trade formula that they used was so simplistic in that it was like, they buy this from us, we buy this from them, and that's the number. So if they have $100 million surplus with us, that means they're stealing from us. Like, bro, Madagascar is not stealing from you just because, they're giving you like vanilla.
Yeah, I was going to say vanilla.
It's like, it's one of those things. Like, Ethiopia exports coffee to us, so we have a trade imbalance with Ethiopia. You think the Ethiopians are out here like, yeah, let me go buy a car from America? Like, they barely got food, bro, So, but the thing is, according to that formula, Ethiopia should get a 50% tax. What is that thing called? A 50% tariff on them. And the funny thing is that coffee now, when it comes to the US, it's just twice as much. It's just 50% more expensive. The Ethiopians, they didn't lose anything. Right. The only person that paid is us, the consumer. Every time we got coffee that came from Ethiopia, we paid 50% more. I mean, look, it benefits us from the treasury end, right? That would work. We'll send F-150s. Bro, like you would need like an entire like village to pool together their money for like 5 years to get a F-150. You know, F-150, a good one, is like $100,000 right now. It's freaking insane.
Nice. They're expensive and nice. Question for you. So thank you for the 200 people that are live with us here on YouTube. And then I know people are chiming in from X as well. We've had over 1,000 people check in, probably even closer to 1,500 click on X. So appreciate those guys coming through. We're up 10% today. Second best day on NASDAQ and S&P 500 history. I was flabbergasted. I was at lunch and I was looking. I was like, okay, we're flat. Me still thinking, you know, we're 4 to 5% from the bottom. Yes, it can get a little worse here. Maybe this ongoing chatter between China, et cetera, drives us down another couple percent. But I thought, you know, at 4,900 on the SPY on the S&P 500, I thought we were within 5% of the bottom. So maybe we touch 4,700 on the S&P, but not much more than that. Obviously, we announced what we announced today. Pause on many of the countries. Do you think this is going to be I heard you kind of talk about this earlier briefly with Amit, but I'm curious to dive into it a little bit more. Do you think this is going to be an ongoing discussion throughout the rest of 2025 where we have paused all these things? Or do you think that this pause is literally to just let those 60 to 70 countries that have called and picked up the phone to start negotiations? That is what will transpire behind the scenes way before the deadline of, say, 90 days from now where that happens. And so it'll remove a lot of the volatility of the back and forth, and it'll allow it to kind of happen more closed doors. And next thing you know, instead of only hearing the negatives, now we'll probably, between now and the next 90 days, only hear the positives, and excluding from that, obviously, what's going on with China and the EU, because I feel like those countries are still kind of at large, with the EU still raising kind of retaliatory tariffs today. And then same thing with China doing the same.
Well, the thing is, the EU announced that they're going to do retaliatory tariffs. They're not going into effect until May. And the thing is, now that the US has kind of come down a little bit, the EU is likely to kind of step back a little bit and do some negotiating. Even the Chinese right now, even though that's kind of escalated right now, there's already talk that the Chinese may be working something out with the US. The key here is most of what the Trump administration wanted wasn't necessarily for the countries to drop their tariffs, but drop some of their non-tariff related like walls that they had put up, right? And I'm sure that there's going to still be some walls that remain, but there's going to be certain key industries that have basically been harassed for years that maybe like that they'll get concessions on. As an example, the EU has huge issues with big tech companies coming over there and then constantly getting fined, like for the most trivial things.
Billions of dollars.
And it doesn't make sense. So the thing is, why would we allow that? Like, our companies are coming there. We don't go after your companies when they come to us, So
we're not freaking out at SAP for, giving us an ERP system.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the good things that will come out of this, with there's some of these non-tariff trade barriers should come down. I just hope, like I said, things kind of get normalized a little bit. Companies that are operating internationally, they're not as likely to just move their production off from the US to Mexico and Canada. And actually they consider like, hey, you know what? Maybe we should have a portion of our supply chain more focused on the domestic US market and build it there, And the funny thing is, international companies have done a good job of setting up factories here in the US also. And I think a lot of people forget that. As an example, I'll give you one, like South Carolina. BMW has one of their largest plants outside of Germany in US, in South Carolina. I was driving my mom between Atlanta and Savannah, and there's a huge Hyundai plant that just got built there, like literally on I-16. I mean, if you see this thing, it's massive. Now Hyundai doesn't have to build it here. They could just keep importing cars, but no, the Hyundai made a decision long time ago that said, look, we want to be part of the American story. Let's build it here. So I think in that regard, it's good. And I think some level of manufacturing coming back to US, I think it's a very positive sign. I don't expect all manufacturing to come back. I think some of those concessions are going to have to be made that, the cost challenge is never going to be a bridge. Even if you put a 100% tariff on Vietnam, you're not going to get t-shirt production back in this country because the cost of production for them is just so low that even if you put like a 500% tariff, you still couldn't get domestic manufacturers to make their stuff here now. On the other hand, there are certain goods that definitely can be made here in the US. There's also strategic industries like pharmaceuticals. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but my dad worked for a pharmaceutical company in Long Island, okay, which I also worked at, okay? We did generic manufacturing over there. And so what happens is we would buy the raw materials from China and buy the raw materials from India, right? And then we would take it, we would blend everything together, put coating on it, and then from that coating, we would actually sell it to like Walmart and I think one of the companies was like St. John's, whatever. And basically, now one of the things that happened about 10 years ago, and my dad lost his job, basically, and my dad retired because of it. This Indian company came, bought the factory, and instead of like still manufacturing things on Long Island, what they do is they would just ship the pills from India, and they would just do quality testing here in the US, and then send it out. Like, all those people lost their jobs. Why? And then the manufacturing, why? So that's the kind of stuff that's like, like a little bit of an issue, because if one day the Indians said, you know what, we don't want to, we get into a war with them, or we get into a war with China, and they stop making the medicines, and we could have a pandemic or whatever. I mean, it could really catch us off sides. So
for sure.
Yeah.
So cruise lines, obviously, like every other industry within kind of our remit, is obviously taking a huge hit. Curious what your thoughts are now that we're, yesterday you were kind of saying put a pause, maybe buy some small, but don't correct me if I'm wrong. I could be mixing up people here. Don't basically load up on everything to date, right? There was still some uncertainty in the market. I understood where you were coming from with that.
Yeah.
You didn't know if we were going to take another leg down. I get it. I was like, I'm always a guy that likes to buy early, so I was buying as much as I could whenever I could.
Yeah.
In fact, before I make this next statement, I'm actually pretty upset that we had today. I would have liked to
because you didn't buy enough.
I didn't buy enough, and I put off some things. Like, I was supposed to put a pool in this year at one of the properties, and I'm delaying that to next year. Things like that, where I wanted to be able to buy a couple months more worth of stock. But at the same time, I recognize that means people with retirement issues, all that are unfortunately suffering because of that. But my question is now that we know what we know, and we think that some of the uncertainty has been removed from the system, cruise lines obviously recovered today. Rocket Lab recovered today. A lot of our favorite stocks that we cover have recovered more than that 9% on the S&P 500. Where are you looking for now? Or are you still waiting a little bit to catch maybe another understanding as to where we're going to level off first? Are we going to continue to rally? I'm just kind of curious where your mind's at with the 9% rally today.
So that's one of the parts that I'm a little bit shocked at, which was the market sold everything off. And usually that's when you get really good deals, because even industries that are not impacted by the tariffs got sold off, right? So usually that means when you have a general market sell-off, that means that it's like a fire sale that now you can take advantage of. Like, as an example, the cruise lines have bookings 1 year out. So you already know what the impact is going to be, right? They're already in collection mode. They're already doing their thing. People are planning their trips. You might see some slowdown in the future, but as of right now, everything looks good. Now, if Trump already pulls back the tariffs and the economy doesn't go into a recession, these companies are going to do just fine. They don't have any cost of goods that come directly from China in order to make their supply chain work. If you have Apple, you're more in a challenge situation because your production is coming from there. For cruise lines, they don't have exposure to that, not to mention the main cruise lines that we have in our portfolio, like Carnival and Norwegian, they're very undervalued, and they got super undervalued. They literally, the PE on Carnival went to like 6. Traditionally, it's traded at 11 to 14, depending on how you look at it. Same thing with Norwegian. On top of that, oil prices started to come down too, which is great for them, because this way they're about 10 to 15% of their total gross I think about 10%. I'm not sure if it's 15, it's highest. OpEx comes just from fuel costs. So if you're able to dramatically lower down the fuel costs, that means that money just goes right back to the bottom line. So it's very helpful. So if you look at last year fuel was $80 a barrel. I mean, $80 a barrel on WTI. This year it's like 60. So it's almost a 25% drop in the cost of fuel. And these guys operate on bunker fuel. So, that's a really big benefit for them. So I think what it is you're starting to see the benefits kind of like in certain valuations. They come up, like Google right now is trading on a forward basis of 15. I mean, not anymore, because I think it was like 145. I think it's jumped to like 160 today, but it's like on forward earnings. So, and Google is like, how is Google impacted by tariffs, really?
Yeah.
It's not impacted by tariffs that much. I mean, maybe some pixel issues, because they do have like some hardware, but I don't think it's like meaningful enough to warrant an issue. There was some talk of maybe Google getting hit as a countermeasure by the Europeans, where the Europeans are like, listen, we're going to have a digital services tax on your companies, and Google would have gotten service taxed on it. But I think now that there's some negotiating there, that's probably off the table now. So Google might actually come out ahead a little bit. Those are like the kinds of industries, like Rocket Lab. How is Rocket Lab impacted by Chinese tariff? They don't get any rockets from China. They don't. I don't know if they get any parts. I don't think they get any parts. I think they do all the fabricating in house.
They do. Yeah, they do a lot of New Zealand, the United States. There is a small amount of things that they manufacture in Canada, but it's pretty minuscule. And I don't know if I don't know what the USMCA trade agreement looks like, so it could be underneath and not be tariffed whatsoever, because it might be exempt based off of that. So I agree with you. So I'm curious, where are you putting? Have you been putting a lot of money into the
VG, dude? My wife doesn't. Well, I had to explain it to her today, so she knows. So I was like, my wife is like, your face looks like better today. What happened? I said, well, I know I have like this money on the side for the house and for taxes. I took some of it and I put it into the market. I'm such a degenerate, dude. But I've been buying VG for like the last.
But high risk, high reward sometimes, right?
I know. I was looking, dude. I know because I kept calling you and I was like, what do you think the EBITDA is going to be like this year, next year? And we were talking about it this weekend. Even our portfolio, we added to our VG position.
Yeah, it's 35% of the public portfolio now currently.
Yeah. So like when things get oversold, I'm definitely a buyer, man. I am definitely a buyer. The challenge is sometimes it's a little bit irresponsible because you just, I don't know. I'm like my dad.
But if it pays off, then you have more money in the market and you have all your money back. So
absolutely.
It's one thing if you were betting on something like, I don't know, if you were betting on next decade, it might be a little bit more of a head scratcher because there's no revenue, right? And while I love next decade and it's bigger, my position in next decade is actually bigger than VG, but I can understand where that's risky. And with any sort of sneeze in the market, Next is going to catch a cold because they don't have the revenue, right? Versus, well, I thought Venture Global would have a little bit more insulation and hasn't. I don't know if it's just because it doesn't have as much of a strong shareholder base because it's just IPO'd. So it's interesting. And I actually found out a girl I went to university with that graduated a petroleum engineering degree. She just became a finance manager at Venture Global. So I need to poke her and see if we can get a little bit more insight. So now I know 2 people that work at Venture Global, one of which I'm in communication with. The other one still, I haven't chatted with her in a while, but she threw up in my bed once. I probably shouldn't have said that. But anyway, she's a fun chick. So I'm trying to think. So you've been buying VG mostly. Have you
Nothing else. Nothing else.
else?
Just VG. I didn't have a lot of money to play with. So, like I said, I just didn't want to be so irresponsible. My wife would leave me, I figured with this, I'll just have to sleep on the couch another couple of weeks, which is fine. I'll work it out, What?
Yeah.
Leave me alone. I'm not talking about you. Bye. All right,
Baby girl, what's your name?
Yeah. Oh, man. So, yeah.
What else was there? I've been buying a crap ton, man. Rocket Lab, Next, VG, Spy, Google, Amazon. I sold SoFi. I think you saw that. I bought some new Leaps, which I'm actually pretty excited because those are 20%. Even though new is taking a complete dump, those are actually 20% from being positive. So once those I think are positive, man, I feel like new over the next 2 years is going to do extremely well. So
I'm loaded up. I'm loaded up on all my positions that I wanted to load up on. So none of and the only position that I really felt underexposed, especially considering the total upside, is VG for me. Because I look at these cash flows and I see the opportunity that they have in terms of a ton of share buybacks. And that's where I see the main opportunity. The other thing is insiders were buying like 1 million shares at a time at $10. So I'm like, bro, I'm getting a 30-40% discount to freaking insiders. Hell yeah, I'll take it all day.
Yeah. The thing that I don't know how much I want to go into this or keep it strictly for the Patreon. I wrote an article last night, so I feel bad just like immediately blowing it. But what I will say is, and I've been pretty cryptic about this, somebody in your Discord basically stated, I won't get into too much detail, but they basically said, VG is trading at an $18 billion market cap valuation. Next is trading at 1.6.
Yeah.
And I said, just what I will say to people, I won't give you the answer, but I'll lead you there. Take a look at how much net size VG is and think about what the net size of next decade would look like. Keeping in mind, and the only hint I will give you for that, keep in mind that the entire Rio Grande LNG project will not be wholly owned by next decade. Part of it is 20%, part of it's 60, etc. So do some mathematics and think about how much on a net basis will next decade have in terms of export capacity. Compare that to VG, and VG is trading poorly right now. Right? Probably the lowest valuation it will ever trade at because of what's happened with respect to the sell-off before the IPO, and then with also what's going on with the tariffs. Obviously, I think VG's been dealt a bad hand on the IPO. But I feel like if you were to just look at where VG should be trading at, you and I were talking about this earlier today. Yeah. Should be trading probably closer to 20 to $25, maybe even more. And then obviously by 2020, if you look forward, what do we think it's valued for, what it should be valued for in the next 10 years? That's a completely different discussion. But I mean, I think just based off of value,
it's like life-changing money. It's life-changing money. It's life-changing money. It's like the Lambo money for us at that point.
It is. No, it's literally that's the way I look at those. So if they pay out the dividends, I'm expecting them to pay out. And I have invested, but I have. It's like that's literally the money I'm going to set aside for my play money every month for a Lamborghini or multiple cars. I probably never own a Lamborghini, but it would hopefully, coupled with the other things I have in the fire, in 5-10 years time, hopefully the thought process is that pays for the house and a nice house at that. And whatever it does, I can just continue to upgrade, and not necessarily have to worry.
What's also good about it is that the business model is very profitable and also very steady. So a lot of times when it comes to natural gas, and this is why they call it, when we had this discussion, the Widowmaker, is because natural gas prices can fluctuate significantly. With the liquefaction business, you get fixed contracts, and then you have spot contracts that are on top of it that can capture upside when the market is dislocated, but you also get the safety of all the long-term contracts. And the Trump administration right now is pushing so many countries to do deals US LNG is going to be here for a long time, like 40, 50 years. So if you think about all the cash flows that are coming in and what these companies are going to be doing with that cash flow, whether that's expansion into more projects like Venture Global, and using some portion of that to basically pay shareholders in the form of either capital returns via share buybacks or dividends. It's a great, sometimes investing becomes too easy. In my opinion, Venture Global is just looking at the business. It's too easy to be in it at this price,
Yeah.
And it's not like a business that can be disrupted like tomorrow morning, where someone could just build a $20 billion liquefaction train and compete against them. No, it's not like
you'll hear that announcement, and then it'll take 5 to 10 years for it to actually be built, and then and that brings me another thing is it's like I can't say too much, but the Alaska LNG thing, I don't know what's going to happen with that, but my thought process is I feel like because it's going to be wanting to be moved at speed, I feel like it's not just going to be one terminal. If I were thinking about this, if you're going to supply, let's say South Korea, Japan, India, all these Southeast Asian countries, and that's your only port from the western side of the North America, coupling that with obviously I think Shell is building one in Canada, north of Vancouver, if I remember correctly, because I have some shale and gas in the center of, or kind of the western side of Canada. They're going to be able to export and do well with that. But to me, you're not just going to put up a 20 MTPA facility, Chris.
Yeah. No, that's probably going to be more.
It's going to be something that's you either have to have a massive facility or, and that's the other thing is it's not one company can build, if you take VG, for example, it's going to take them time for them to build up to 150 MTPA. So if you think about it, it's probably going to be multiple companies that have to build multiple sites so that they can take on the debt. And it's not just one company that, because to me, you're basically just going to try to recreate the Gulf Coast LNG export capacity, not, one for one, but a smaller version of that in Alaska. So probably have 3-4 projects. That's my thought. If I was Trump, that's what I would try to do.
Yeah.
The big problem is the pipeline. How do you get the pipeline? Because you have 13 TCF of gas. No, it's more than that. Maybe 45 TCF of gas that's stuck, plus other fields that haven't been developed yet in Alaska that need to export. Plus, you have stuff in the Cook Inlet. You have stuff in Kenai
It's
Peninsula.
not going to be done overnight. It's definitely not going to be done overnight. Yeah.
But my thought is, it's what does that mean for next? What does that mean for Venture Global, right? Will they get pulled into that, like some of the other companies I know are? Anyway, interesting there. Cruise lines. Are you building more on cruise lines?
I'm pretty comfortable with what I have because I'm already kind of very exposed to cruise lines. So I'm kind of just keeping that, at a good pace right now. So some of the questions I see in the chat are actually good questions that, first and foremost, some people are saying, well, why did revenue go down for Venture Global? That's a simple answer. Venture Global was selling cargoes into the market at spot prices. So spot prices are fluctuating prices. And they did that during its commissioning phase. So during the commissioning phase, they can sell cargoes into the open market, and whatever the price is what you're going to get. So if the price goes down, you're going to get less. So last year, because it was still on the tail end of the Russian-Ukraine invasion, the price of natural gas was still elevated. Last year, it wasn't as elevated. So that's why the revenues went down. But the good thing is, if you look at their cash flows were pretty steady, and they used some of those cash flows to invest in this next facility that's 3 times as big. Well, twice as big. Let's not say 3 times. It's twice as big. So now you're going to have the cash flows from that coming in. So what it is it's almost like one facility. You make some money, and it's cash flowing now because now it goes onto the fixed contract. Fixed contracts with long-term off-takers. And then the next facility comes online and you sell into the spot, and spot is much higher than it's just much higher. And then eventually that'll go into long-term contract. But then you'll have a third facility coming up. So it's almost like you're layering on top earnings on top of earnings on top of earnings. So that's where you have to look at this company. Now, some of the people that have done analysis on this company, like this guy Dustin something, right? He did a pretty good breakdown, but I think some of his information may not be as correct. And so he did an entire DCF model on it, but a lot of figures that he had in there, in my opinion, were not, I don't want to say wrong, but just not 100% in the correct zone. So here's an example. He used the liquefaction fee, the entire like in his DCF, he used the same liquefaction fee, the fixed liquefaction fee for the next like 5 years or 10 years, however long he did it. What he forgot was the liquefaction fee is actually indexed to inflation. So as inflation goes up, the liquefaction fee goes up, but that's not in his DCF. And that's a very basic thing, so that's why his numbers started to not work out as well. So, the other thing is there's no, as far as I can tell, when he did his share counts, when he calculated his share counts, he didn't account for any buybacks. Because you can't really do that in a DCF anyway, because that's capital return. But, when you're an investor and you can read between the lines, you can say, look, they're going to have massive levels of depreciation. So their net income is not going to look great, but they're going to be able to use the cash flow to buy back shares. So that's how certain businesses are. So if a lot of people, they try to value something like Amazon, they're like, oh, Amazon's got a high PE. Yeah, because they take all their capital, reinvest it back into building more stuff out, and they use all of that stuff to depreciate, but that cash flow grows heavy. So if you look at Amazon, you shouldn't be valuing it based on price to earnings. You should be valuing it based on cash flow. And if you do that with Venture Global, you're going to see that they have tremendous amount of cash flows coming in the future.
Yeah, it's the same thing with a lot of oil companies and real estate. Real estate, you get a lot of depreciation credits to be able to offset a lot of taxes. It's an incentive the government basically gives you to continue to reinvest. And so, the net income piece, when you look at net income, and this is true with any business, it might include one-off goodwill impacts or positives or negatives, right? It might include mark-to-market accounting. So it's nice to actually look at the cash flow statement to see what, in terms of cash flow in versus cash outflow, actually happened. Because exactly like Chris said, I'm expecting the EBITDA to be probably twice as much, if not a little bit more, than the net income, just based off the fact that you get that depreciation piece. Just like, for example, if you have a house and you buy it to rent out, you get to depreciate the value of the home, not the land, but the home, over 27 and a half years and 39 and a half years if it's a commercial property. So let's take, for example, it's $395,000 and you have a commercial property. Every year, you're going to be able to write off $10,000. So if you only make $800 a month in cash flow from that, well, you technically don't have to pay any taxes on that because the depreciation covers that. So net income on the property, even though you made $10,000 that year, or maybe I messed that up. No, I did it right. You're being able to write off $10,000 a year because of the fact that it's $395,000 in improvements on the land divided by 39 and a half years, which gets you $10,000 a year in depreciation, which completely offsets your income. So it's the same exact sort of methodology with respect to that. I was looking in the background for TTF over the past several years, and I couldn't find a good chart for it. But
I have one. TTF right now is trading at about 11, 12. Usually it's about 8, 9, depending on what season, because you know how it is with the seasons. When the season gets under too hot, everything kind of comes down, and then it goes the other way. So it is what it is. But yeah, I think these facilities are going to do well for us. I think it's a good part of our portfolio. I think if it recovers to a point where we think it's comfortable, I think we're going to trim the position a little bit just to be on the good risk management side, because that's what you got to do. If you're going to manage a portfolio, you got to manage your risk. You can't be all in on one thing, and 35% exposure on one company is not good. Like that's, you should dial it back when things are good. Even if you believe in it really long term, just as a smart thing, you should keep it. Chris, did VG make profit with IPO? Was at $25? Any main reason why VG shares are low? They just IPO'd at a bad time, and then the guidance that they give was a little bit conservative. So they came down to like the 15s. Analysts, said, oh, we were expecting 8 billion in EBITDA. You guys are saying you're only going to have 7 billion EBITDA. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Maybe, it goes down. So now,
and a ramp up year. Real scary. Yeah.
And the thing is, like, it's hard to project. Like, I don't even know how these analysts could sit there with a square face and be like, yeah, I think it's going to be this. Like, how can you tell? Because first of all, even the company is taking a risk by issuing guidance because so much of their revenue is coming in from spot prices.
Yeah.
If it was something like LNG or Cheniere, that makes sense because LNG has a really good visibility on how much cash flow they're going to generate.
Well, it's built into the contract. They say we're going to charge you $3.50 for liquefaction costs.
Yeah.
Plus 15% of Henry Hub. So they're like, well, regardless, we're going to make approximately, let's just say Henry Hub's at $3 or it's $4. They know they're going to make 15% off $3 or $4 plus the $3.50 of liquefaction and call it a day. And then what's your OPEX, right? Super easy for Cheniere, super easy for next decade.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, right now with Venture Global, because they have so much in spot, the price fluctuation in its stock price is gonna be pretty significant. When they start to have more of their revenue come from long-term contracts and basically EBITDA is going to be much easier to project, then I think the earnings targets should be taken a lot more seriously, right? Yeah. Like right now, they just dropped down to $7. These guys next quarter, they could do well. And you know what? They've got a $4 billion in cash right now with $1.7 billion on top of that coming from the IPO. And then probably another billion, maybe a little less than $1 billion coming in from this quarter's earnings, right? So you've got a good amount of cash that's going to be on your balance sheet. So if they use that to buy back shares, you're talking about, maybe probably a $2 billion share buyback this year based on what I'm thinking. If they do $2 billion, you're retiring almost 200 million shares, right? And so the float right now is 2.4. You're taking out almost what is that, 5% of the total float?
Almost 8%.
8%, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely benefit. And, Chris and I were just looking earlier about Cheniere. Cheniere, if you were, I don't know how much DD we want to give out for free, but the Cheniere, if you look at fiscal year 24, it's probably going to be pretty comparable to what Venture Global is going to do this year in terms of EBITDA. They bought back $2 billion worth of shares, paid back $1.5 billion worth of debt. So another thing about this with Chris knows this, so I'm just going to reiterate it to you guys. The return on capital employed for these guys is 40%.
Yeah, it's fucking insane.
So if you're able to, going back to what Chris was talking about at the beginning of the stream, when you have this margin, right, where you're able to borrow at, let's just say, fuck it, 10%. I'd borrow at 10% and get a return on capital of 40% any goddamn day of the week. If I could figure out a way to do that steadily and not have to be in a place where you have cyclical cash flows and stuff like that. So to me, it's like, why rush almost to pay back the
They're not going to. They're going to capitalize the debt. Yeah,
pay back. Find a good medium ground where your debt to EBITDA is sufficient, because right now, obviously, the debt to EBITDA this year would probably be, if they hang out at a $20 billion net,
it'll be 4 times.
It'll be like 3 to 4 times. So it's not horrible. If it was more than 5, I'd be more. But you have to keep in mind, it's not like they're not building stuff in the future. They are. Yeah. And that third facility is going to be a monster. Like, I think it's, if I remember correctly, it's supposed to be 30 MTPA. Let me pull it up.
Yeah. And they're right now they're renegotiating contracts for CP2 to be higher. So yeah.
No, CP2 is supposed to be just the same size.
No. I'm saying like the cost for liquefaction fee is going to be higher.
Yeah.
So
I just want to, I misspoke. So CP2, Kakushu Project 2, is supposed to be just about the same size as Plaquemines. to give everyone context, and Chris, I don't know if you saw this in some of the discussions with South Korea and stuff or not. So at the moment, CP2 is about 50% contracted out. It has not been FID. The hope is within the next few months it is. This will also be a two-phase, so 10 MTPA plus 10 MTTA, with hopefully getting you to 20 MTPA nameplate with hopefully up to 28 MTPA if you get above nameplate, because they've been able to get 30 to 40% gains, just based off the fact that the facility has been just overperforming. Plaquemines has the Calcasieu project is performing kind of as expected, but they have 9.25 out of 20 contracted. South Korea, Japan, etc. They mentioned the CP2 project multiple times about signing up for that, as well as the Rio Grande project, which is the next decade project, multiple times associated with that. So I'm kind of curious as to, how much an Inpex. So example, Inpex is a Japanese company. They only have 0.3 MTPA on the Plaquemines project, and that's for 3 years. So it's like 0.3 MTPA is not a lot. 0.3 MTPA for context, 0.3 times 48, that's maybe divided by like 3.3, 4 to 5 boats a year. When these things are going to be exporting 300 to 350 boats this year, keep in mind 2027, it's probably going to be north of 500 boats a year, maybe closer to 600 boats a year by that point. So when you're talking about 4 to 5 boats a year for 3 years, you're talking about 15 total boats. Trump's sitting here like, sign up for CP2, my guy. Like, why are you buying it from Qatar? Why are you buying it from Australia? Will Australia LNG even be around in 20 years? There isn't a lot of backfill projects.
The cost for them is huge. Yeah. I don't even know how they make any money on some of their projects, man.
Australia is really in a tough spot right now. There's not been a lot of capital investment. 20 years ago, it was genius, right? It was shooting fish in a barrel. Well, the costs have just gone through the roof. The regulatory environment in Australia is a little bit more difficult now. So it's just, we have the feed gas that we have in the United States comparatively. You're talking about $4 Henry Hub versus, I don't know what it's going to cost you to get it out of the ground over and off the northwest shelf of Australia or Eastern Australia. That's just tough. But it's hard. It's going to be hard to compete. And obviously, I think the big players are obviously it's going to be Qatar and in the United States. And the reason why Qatar literally has a massive. It's like I don't even want to begin to fathom. I've worked on reservoirs that are billions of barrels of reservoirs. How much gas these guys are exporting from this one field is just mind-boggling to me. I want to look at it. I want to get my eyes on this goddamn Warlock. This thing. Like in terms of world-class fields, there's been a couple world-class fields I've worked on. There's another one that I'm trying to get my fingers on right now. But, that is a world-class field. It's actually shared with Iran, believe it or not. So it actually crosses the maritime border. Iran develops it on their side, feeds their local markets, and then
I think Basra fields are pretty big too from Iraq. Let me just look it up. Not guess.
I won't speak much on Iraq.
Yeah. I've done my own private research, so just for anyone asking, he didn't give me any information. I knew of it all myself. But it's crazy the amount of goddamn Middle Easterns, bro. They're just so blessed with cheap energy over there. You know,
it's gonna get even more, man. Like I shouldn't say much about this other, but the UAE is continuing to invest very heavily. There's been a lot of joint venture projects that are set up to more, as you've seen, right? ADNOC getting more involved with Next. Saudi Aramco getting involved with Next.
Can we talk about Woodside?
Yeah, we can talk about
how every Tellurian investor got screwed over. I mean, bro, we did well because we got in at such a low price, and we also had TELZ bonds, which did well. But everyone who was in Tellurian, I mean, Suki literally like juggled these people for 5 years. So eventually he got kicked out. And then it got sold to Woodside. And Woodside
sold for again? I forget.
$1 billion. That's it. $1 billion. Dude, Woodside came out like a bandit on that deal, bro.
Let me see. 900 million. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And with that, with net debt, it ended up being 1.2.
Right.
And tell them what they did what Stone Peak did. Tell them how they fucking finagled this shit. This is where it gets
okay.
good.
Less than a year later, let me just show you guys. They sold a partial stake to
40%, right? 40%.
Yeah, 40% to Stone Peak, which is a private equity firm, for 5.7 billion.
And to get carried for 2 years. So Woodside doesn't have to pay anything for 25 and 26. And Woodside has also said, we don't know if we want to hold 60%, so we're probably still going to farm down.
Yo, BP fucked up, man. They should have bought this. Like, it's so sad because all the plans were already done. Bechtel, the EPC contract was done. They started even putting in the foundations. They had FERC approval. It's like, bro, that was the biggest fumble I've ever seen in business history. And the amount of shareholder money that was burned along the way. And Woodside came in, bought it for a song.
I mean, granted, Woodside will still have to develop the facility, right? So, I mean, but the fact that they basically got it handed for $1 billion, a ready project.
They didn't have to do any work, nothing. They didn't have to spend money on any land acquisition,
EPC.
all the regular EPC. They didn't have to do any regulatory, like mumbo jumbo that you typically have to go through with these facilities. I mean, just the regulatory part alone costs you 3 years of development. Yeah. You have to do like 1,000 studies with like every sort of species under the sun in that local area. Then you got to fight off all these protesters that are always like hampering development. I mean this project, so that they tried to do Tellurian, it literally started after Suki got kicked out of Cheniere. And he's trying to do another one.
Is he?
Freaking Suki, bro. This is the guy, man. This is I can't believe this guy is trying to go a third time. Here, take a look at this. Right here, look. A third nat gas venture. This guy, man.
But it goes to show you, right? I mean, it's obviously a profitable business, right?
Yeah.
And to get people to context as to why, and the reason why Next is, well, obviously the whole market was up today, but the reason why Next went up even yesterday was because the announcement that Saudi Aramco was going to do 1.2 MTPA or something of the like in terms of offtake agreements on the fourth train. So the fourth train for Rio Grande is not yet sanctioned. And it's going to be about 5 MTPA for that particular train. 3 and some change has been. So about over half of it has been negotiated at this point. Total has the option to buy another 1.5 MTPA.
Yeah.
And that would allow you to sanction the project. So basically the project is probably going to be sanctioned here within the next quarter or so. The real question is does Total want it? I don't understand why Total wouldn't want to. If they already have the option, and that option probably means that they're going to get some sort of discount or favorable rates comparatively to a new player. So there's that. Or you're just waiting for another person like South Korea, Japan, etc., to come in. And with that, then you can finance it.
Sorry, you're mentioning South Korea and Japan. I wonder if the Trump admin is trying to finagle a deal where they end up taking equity stakes in something like CP2, right? To get it to FID, or hear me out, provide cheap loans. Right? So one hand, you take an offtake agreement, but on the other hand, you provide cheap jet financing. So now you get both best of both worlds. Maybe even take an equity stake. I mean, that's what Japan did with some of their other terminals. Japan, they said, look, we'll be an off taker, but we also are going to take equity, and they did extremely well during the Russian Ukraine war, because what they did is all those cargoes that were supposed to go to Japan, they rerouted them to Europe and got $70, $80 per MMBTU. And they were contracted $3, $4 for a fixed liquefaction. Insane, right?
It's insane. Yeah, I've seen that as well. I mean, there's a lot of Qatar, actually, I forget what project it is with Exxon. It either it's about to start shipping LNG or it has, but they own 40% of it. Exxon owns 60%. Yeah. And I think there's going to be another big project in Guyana, because you have to think there's no export or local market for Guyana, and you're producing now over 2 million barrels of oil per day out of Guyana. So liquid, obviously, easy. You can ship the oil very easily globally, but the gas piece, there's no liquefaction trains to be able to do it. So what are they going to do? I think they are going to build some local gas plants, but right now all they're doing is re-injecting that gas back into the reservoirs to maintain pressure support. So at what point is there an LNG facility set up there in Guyana? Curious with respect to that. And then what else was I going to say? It's a profitable, very profitable.
One recent development that just came around. So LNG prices here in the US, they started to climb up to like $4 per MMBTU, and Europe, they started to come down to like $11 per BTU, right? So you've got this compression in spreads. But then today, the Trump administration signed a deal to expand utilization of coal. So I'm like, oh man, Donnie, like, bro, just what are you doing, Donnie? Like, we're going to use more coal. That means that more LNG is probably, the price of LNG is going to come down here in the US. So now you're looking at probably two, maybe. See, the challenge that I keep seeing, though, with US LNG is that a lot of the LNG is coming from excess of oil drilling. And so the price of oil comes down. So the thing is, the value of that byproduct or that waste product, literally this like 10 years ago, people were just flaring the fucking thing. Now they can actually capture it. So my thing is, if oil prices come down, then Henry Hub should theoretically go up, but this is why you have those fixed term contracts, right? That basically see you not have to deal with that, that spread compressing and expanding. So,
yeah, I mean, if we're exporting, let's say 100 MTPA, that's 4.8 TCF. Divided by 48. That's 4.8 TCF per year. So daily it's 13 BCF. So yeah, we're exporting about 13 BCF a day at the moment. And I think the US makes about 60 to 70 BCF a day. So if we end up doubling this to about 30 BCF a day, which I think is about where we're going to head to in the next decade to 15 years, it's going to be pretty interesting, because now you're competing against the majority. Like you stated, coal has kind of been on the decline. Natural gas has picked up the slack internally in the U.S., but even still, we're producing so much excess that's why Henry Hub has been so cheap, and that's part of the reason why we moved to it's cleaner, one, instead of coal, and then two, it's cheap, and we have an abundance of it. So a lot of these coal plants have been changed to natural gas. That's actually why you've seen CO2 emissions in the atmosphere in the United States actually decline over the last several years. But because obviously you're burning a much more fuel-efficient fuel. But I can go on to that for another question that was in the chat. What are you doing? Are you more bullish on Next or VG? That's not up for me to decide, right? That's for everyone who's investing in it to decide. The key points are VG is actually producing and exporting gas as we speak, and is making money, is profitable. It has dividends. It actually has generated a net income, EBITDA, last year, versus next decade. You're still potentially 2 years, maybe 2.5 years from seeing the first ounce of LNG be exported. And so between now and then, there's a lot of variability that can happen in that stock price. The forward potential can be great, right? But then again, if you don't have revenue to fall back on, or something regulatory changes within the government, Donnie gets overthrown, or for some reason there's a new Paris Agreement or what have you, I think it's a very low likelihood, but I'm just letting you know, like you're more at risk because you don't have, or you have yet to export from that facility and you have no revenues to do so. Coupling that with, if you were to look at the value of what has been sanctioned at next decade, the valuation's not that good, right? If you were to look at what the future total value is, right, that's when it gets beautiful. But you have to get to there for it to get to that full valuation. So
yeah,
you're in a much better journey right now than Next, but you have to think Next is $18 billion company and might grow to be $150 billion company, or somewhere in between, versus, sorry, I might have misspoke. Venture Global will be $100 to $150 billion company, or somewhere in between. Next decade, I'm not going to say where I think it should go, but it's going to be much smaller than that. So you can't take and be like, oh, they're verbatim the same, right? And Chris also alluded to the fact that at the moment, Venture Global selling more spot prices. Who's to say if that's going to continue, or if going into the future facilities, if they're going to do more spot, finance it themselves, or they are going to do the long-term contracting deals comparable to what Cheniere is doing. Next decade, at the moment, for what we know, trains 4 and 5 will be pretty much fully at 90%, maybe more, contracted for these steady contracts. So the variability of the revenue stream might be up, down, and sideways, but at the same time, there's no gas being exported. So it's kind of like investing in Archer versus, what's a small startup like aerospace company?
Boom.
Maybe Anduril, like Archer versus Anduril. They're not, it's apples and oranges, but one's producing revenue and produces things that fly through the air. The other one is hypothetically going to be flying things through the air and has done testing, but hasn't really, that's a bad example, but hopefully people understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah. This guy, I don't know where he's getting all this data, but this guy's awesome. Ron
H. Yeah.
Yeah. I got to find out like what his,
I think he has a Tableau set up at least.
Bro,
I don't know if
I'm on his,
he has a
website that actually has traffic.
Really?
Yeah.
I just look at all of his X data.
Bro, look at this. He's got live up-to-date data.
Holy shit.
On facilities and what's docked where. He's tracking cargo by cargo.
Does this guy have a donation link somewhere? I'll definitely throw him a couple dollars a month.
Bro, I'm telling you, he's got everything, like volumes.
Oh, yeah, this is the one. Those are the ones I look at all the time.
Yeah, so you can see the country. You can see this, like how much, like he's got this, which is the Plaquemines Gator Express. Look at that they're how much gas is going through right now, and it's like live data. Yeah,
to give
look
people
at that ramp up.
2.3 BCF a day times 365 is 839. Divide that by 48, so that's a MTPA equivalent of 17 and a half.
Yeah,
so they're ramping up, and that's supposed to go to 20. They basically their first time they exported was December. So the fact that they're 3/4 of the way to nameplate within 4 months is very impressive.
Yeah, and then this one right here is Calcasieu. So they've already exceeded what they draw from compared to Calcasieu. Calcasieu does what, 10 MTA nameplate with 12 point this. So here's what they did now. Calcasieu doing about between 1.6 and 1.8.
1.8 on an instantaneous basis is about 13.6 MTPA.
Yeah.
So maybe you use 90% of that. So they're probably going to average around 12. So not quite the 30 to 40% above nameplate like they're talking about Plaquemines, but still really good.
Yeah. Now Plaquemines is just on another level of, look at this. And then he's actually got per cargoes too, like how many cargoes per
month,
per thing. Yeah, so like where is it? Destination. No, he's got it by destination. This is Sabine Pass, where you're looking at Calcasieu.
Calcasieu's done
So
like
Calcasieu.
three so far.
So this is
Oh, that's
2024.
that's destination by 24. Got it.
Yeah. I get a, let me see what the year. I
Look
just
at
want to see
that.
25.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I'm telling you, this guy's he's got skills. There it is. This is the one for Calcasieu. So
For the
4,
month.
3. Yeah. So 4,
To
3,
the
3.
ninth. So if you go to the end day, the second selection on the left, if you move that
Where?
to like the left, all the way on the left, end
Where?
day, on the bottom of this graphic,
Okay. Yeah. Right
left.
here.
Yep, and you switch that to 30th or 31st, or
Yeah. There you go.
that'll show you kind of like on a regular
Oh, yeah.
basis what it's
So
exported.
11, 10, and 13. So that's what 23 plus that. So 30, 34 is what it looks
and
like.
that's about what they're predicting for first
Yeah.
quarter.
Yeah. I wonder if do they have plaque means? Oh, they got plaque means on here too now.
Yeah, so I think they were supposed to get the highest potential that they were forecasting was like 60 odd something, and Plaquemines just hit the 28. I think that they were supposed to.
Look at that. So 6, 9, so that's 15, 15, and 14. But remember, when Venture reports, they don't do the export. It's when it's actually delivered. That's what they count. It was in their S1.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll
So
look at that.
let me look at their SEC filings because they actually did Venture Global. So they'd actually show this right here. Let me pull it up.
You mean for their own ships, or do you mean?
No. For like right here, like what they actually recorded.
Yeah.
So right here, if you look at this, you can see these are the prices. At Calcasieu, they did 34, and at Plaquemines, they did 29. So whatever that guy's numbers were, they were pretty accurate. But you can see here, the company recognizes revenue when it transfers control of promised goods and services to its customers in an amount that reflects the consideration company expects to be entitled to, right? So revenue from the sale of LNG is recognized by the company at point in time when the LNG is delivered to the customer at the agreed upon LNG terminal, which is the point where when legal title, physical ownership. So where is that? It's at the maybe
It
it's
depends.
at the export. Yeah, maybe it's
I
at
think
the export.
I think it depends,
yeah.
right? So I think if you were to say if Venture Global were to be shipping it on behalf of someone, right? So keep in mind, because they can own basically from the pipeline to when it gets regasified in Europe,
right?
In some of the places, then I think that would technically be when the revenue is recognized. Versus if you were giving it through the contracts that BP and Shell have for Calcasieu Pass original, then that I think would be like it says right there, the second paragraph, revenue associated with exported free on board is recognized when the LNG vessel is unloaded.
Is loaded. Gotcha. Yep. Okay.
So I guess it really just depends on what vessel it is. So if it's a Venture vessel, and we're shipping, like Venture meaning Venture is shipping it, then that revenue might not be recognized until it hits the destination. But if it's shipping to a different customer or through a different customer like BP, Shell, Impex, if you were to look at like Plaquemines, then yeah.
By the way, they also expanded their fleet. So if you look at Venture, like they finished...
what was this? What was that specifically? That was an S1 stating that they basically closed out Q1, or what was that?
No, it's just a production 8K. So it's just like an investor. I don't know, whatever they call it.
Okay, just to close out. This is how much we did.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, there's no surprises because it's pretty evident.
No, it's there. I mean, the key is its guidance going to be changed because right now, if you look at this Calcasieu, they did 880. But remember, starting April 15th, any new liquefaction is going to be done turned down to like $1.98.
And also remember that they did a flat $7 MMBTU
Yeah.
for the earnings.
Yeah. So, and for Plaquemines, they did about 7.26. So it's actually come down. So the spread might have come down a little bit, but it then, like toward the end of the year, whatever, it might accelerate. But, they guided conservatively from what I can tell. They could easily do probably like 7.5 to maybe 8. So, it just depends on how spot pricing works for them. But even so, it's still very undervalued for what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And especially if they start doing share buybacks, forget it. This thing runs. So
fingers crossed at some point.
Yeah. So yeah, they completed a sale. I think they're doing they're going to expand their fleet to 12 ships. Yeah. Because the thing is, like, they have so much spot. So they figured, you know what? If we have that flexibility to sell into the spot market, we want to vertically own the entire thing. So they own their own pipeline. They own their own, what is that thing called? Regasification in Europe right now. Like they have contracts for that. Then they also have ships now. So they got 12 tankers on their own. So yeah.
Let's see. So they're doing 6 extra MTPA per year. So it's about 300 MMBTU additional. So that's 24 boats. That makes sense. I mean, it makes sense because each boat is going to take about a month and a half round trip, month to a month and a half round trip to Europe. So if you have 12 boats and you need, specifically, I'm just talking like Plaquemines, 6 MTPA is 24 BCF, divide that by 3. So you need 8 boats alone on a monthly basis, specifically for Plaquemines, if it's fully up and running for spot. And then not to take into account, let's just say you get the 2 MTPA additional for Calcasieu. So multiply that by 48. So 2 times 48, it's an additional 96 MMBTU per annum. Divide that by 3.3. That's generally the size. That's 29 in total.
Well,
divide that by 12.
Some of the other ones that they have contracted are like much bigger vessel sizes. Like the one that you're calculating is about what is it? Like the gross tonnage is about 170,000 gross tonnage. The next few are going to be like 200 gross tons.
Yeah, I was looking at ones that are exporting about 3.1 to 3.4 BCF, or basically about the equivalent MMBTU.
Yeah.
So for just Calcasieu Pass, that's an additional 2 to 2.5 boats per month as well.
Yeah.
So you think about it combined, you have 8 boats from Plaquemines, 2 to 2.5 boats from Calcasieu Pass. That 12 actually starts to make a lot of sense, considering it's going to take a month to a month and a half per boat round trip.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't have to deal with the fluctuations of the tanker prices rising and coming down.
And like you stated as well, Plaquemines is for the next 18 months is going to be fully. So I was just talking about the excess for the long term, right? Once they go on COB and or COD, commercial online date, and they have like their contract set in place for that 20 MTPA for Plaquemines, they have that 6 additional that they can sell. I was calculating just that 6 additional, but you're right. I mean, right now they're selling all spot of, like you stated, let's just do some quick math. So it was 26 MTPA times 48. That's 1.2 TCF per year. And then you divide that by 12. It's 104 BCF. And you divide that by, it's 100. Hold on, let me just do the 1248. The 1248 divided by the 3.3. What the hell did I do? 1248 divided by the 3.3. Yeah, that's your 350 boats a year.
Yeah.
Full capacity, like we were talking about. That's when Plaquemines is fully ramped up. So yeah, if you include the Calcasieu Pass, then you add another 100 on top of that. You're going to be close to 400, 500 boats a year.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I got to head out. It's a 2-hour stream. We gave away way too much information, even though we said we wouldn't do that. We try to keep it for our Patreon people. But both of us are very bullish on Venture Global, and they're already cash flowing. So I think it's a much safer bet than Next Decade. But Next Decade is going to be a big thing too. So
Yeah,
you
I have
know,
more
invest
personally.
invest at your own risk. Of course, none of what we're saying is 100% true. If the facility tomorrow catches fire and burns down, it's not our fault.
Yeah.
It's just God doing what God
this
does.
could be my parents' basement that I'm reporting live from. So you don't know that, right? It could be a green screen,
Yeah.
Who knows? So cool, man.
All right, brother. Have a good one.
Thank you.
I'll
Yeah,
see
let
ya.
me toss out the outro, and I'll see you on the next one.